This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 272 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. So stuff happened last weekend, and I haven't talked about that stuff on the Late Round Podcast, so here goes. Andrew Luck retired. You can have your takes as to whether or not it was fair, or maybe, like Doug Gottlieb, you think he's just a typical millennial who's quitting because things are too hard. I'd say that's an uneducated take, but whatever. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. We've got to talk about the fantasy impact, because this is a fantasy football podcast. If you were following me on Twitter when the announcement hit this weekend, then you saw how some of my rankings changed within the Colts offense. T.Y. Hilton became more of a low-end wide receiver too, and Marlon Mack's ranking dropped as well. And I'm now just avoiding the rest. That includes the tight ends. I know Jack Doyle did a lot with Jacoby Brissett in 2017, but this is a completely different team with different competition in that offense. It's hard to see him as anything more than a mid-range tight end 2 at best. So let's just dig into T.Y. Hilton and Marlon Mack. One of my big fears with Hilton is inconsistency. Last season in fantasy-relevant games, Hilton ranked outside the top 30 in weekly scoring just twice. With Brissett, 10 of his 15 games, so this excludes week 17, but 10 of his 15 games saw him finish worse than wide receiver 42 in weekly PPR scoring. The other 5 saw him with a top 20 performance. Now this is just descriptive data, but when you get a big play receiver with a questionable quarterback, this can happen. Hilton's a scary pick right now, even though I love him as a player. I actually think that Marlon Mack is a little bit more interesting to dissect though. Because the thought that a lot of people had when this happened, at least in my mentions, was that the Colts would be more run-heavy, so this would hurt Marlon Mack less. Let's look at this more philosophically, though. Earlier this offseason, I did an entire episode on the importance of offensive situation in fantasy football. Now, entering a season, predicting which offenses will be good and which offenses will be bad, that can be tough. But we at least know that a move from Andrew Luck to Jacoby Brissett will likely hurt the Colts offense. I think that's an objectively correct take. One of the things that I found and that I talked about in that episode is that of the 90th percentile running back season since 2011, so the really good seasons by running backs, half of them came from offenses that ranked in the top 10 in NumberFire's expected points model. And only 5% of them came from offenses that ranked 25th or worse. And over 3/4 were in offenses that ranked in the top half of the league. This isn't really that surprising. Good offenses score more points, and they give their players more opportunity to score fantasy points. That's the thing that hurts Marlon Mack. Sure, the Colts may go with a more run-heavy philosophy, but that also may translate to fewer plays run, and that's especially true if they're less efficient offensively. And that could make his rush attempt projection not shift all that much. The other side to this is that you now absolutely have to bank on Marlon Mack having a bigger role as a pass catcher. With Andrew Luck, it didn't matter that much because the Colts were more likely to see a positive game script. Now with Jacoby Brissett, they'll likely face more negative scripts. And in the 2 games where the Colts lost last year when Marlon Mack was active, he played no more than 37% of Indy's snaps. He finished with a combined 20 attempts and 3 targets in those 2 games. And he had an RB24 and an RB58 finish. Now, Mack did start playing more as a receiver towards the end of last year for the Colts. But again, you now have to bank on that happening for him to be a viable fantasy asset this year. So it's a tough situation. I think Mack is more in that fringe RB2 range at this point, maybe even a high-end RB3, whereas like I said with T.Y. Hilton, he's more of a low-end wide receiver too. This Andrew Luck retirement really did change the fantasy football landscape. Now before getting to the questions this week, I wanted to send another reminder about FanDuel's World Fantasy Football Championship. From September 5th through December 1st, you can enter a number of different qualifiers at different prize points over on FanDuel to earn a seat at the $2.5 million live final in Puerto Rico or the $3.5 million online championship. That's $6 million in prizes. For more info on the WFFC, visit FanDuel.com/WFFC or download the app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. This first question is from @NinjaDerek on Twitter. I've been targeting Lamar Jackson late in my mocks thus far, but Yahoo now has him ranked at 88. My usual 12th round pick has suddenly turned into a 10th. Can he even still be considered a late round quarterback, or am I being an idiot? Remember guys, the late round quarterback strategy isn't just about a game of chicken. It's not about finding a quarterback in a particular round. It's that the market generally tells you that you should get a late round quarterback for value purposes. I won't go through all the math on this show because I've talked about it plenty. Episode 139 on Superflex Leagues covers that strategy in detail. But I wanted to kick things off with this question because it's important to remember. The late round quarterback strategy isn't about simply getting a guy in the 12th or the 13th or the 14th round. It's not about being the last person to draft a quarterback or labeling a player as a late round quarterback. It's about extracting value. And Lamar Jackson in the 10th is fine in most cases if he's someone that you really want to get. And that's especially true if you're drafting him as the 12th or the 13th quarterback off the board. This next question is from @JustinWhiteVA. I went later round QB and drafted Kyler for $4 and Josh Allen for $1 in a $200 16-team auction. Does the preseason give you pause on Kyler? That seems like a great best ball pairing, but a recipe for a possible headache in season long. I got a couple of questions about Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense this week, so I figured that I'd bring it up on today's show. And to me, I'm not really scared off of Arizona's offense at all. They're not running the same offense that they're going to run in the regular season. You're going to see more receivers on the field at once during the regular season, and you're going to see a faster-paced offense. And aside from that Oakland game, I actually like what I've seen from Kyler Murray. He's made some really incredible throws. There's going to be growing pains, but the reason that you're drafting him isn't because he's going to be the best passer in football. It's the dual threat ability and the volume in that offense. And for the record, I'm in a league just like this, and on Monday I drafted both Kyler Murray and Josh Allen. So I'm with you with that quarterback pairing. This next question is from @SCedar015. Dare Ogunbowale seems to fit your breakout running back model pretty well. Not a pure handcuff, pass catching ability, murky backfield, good offense. Like him as a 2019 breakout? I like him as a late round dart throw, yeah. Even with Godwin, Evans, and Howard, there's some volume to go around in that passing offense. And if he's the pass catching back on a team that could be trailing a good bit this year, then he'll have some value. It wouldn't surprise me if he's this year's Jalen Richard. So if you're in a PPR format, I'd be targeting him as a bench stash. And maybe he steals some early down work as the season goes on as well. This next question is from @Ned_zone. Do you want Henderson or Brown in the Rams backfield at this point? When are you comfortable pulling the trigger? Straight up, I like Darrell Henderson a lot more than Malcolm Brown. Henderson's going to have some sort of role on this team regardless of Todd Gurley's health. Like an 8 to 12 touch player. He's a flex play. Malcolm Brown, though, is someone who would benefit a lot more from a Todd Gurley injury. Like Henderson would benefit and he'd see an uptick in volume. But Brown would go from barely being usable to being pretty freaking usable. But the upside with Brown in like a best ball format is that the usage in the Rams backfield may be unpredictable, and he's likely to still post some production this year given Gurley's knee. But in a best ball format, you don't have to deal with that predictability. If he finds the end zone or if he has a decent game, then he can slot into your lineup. So I actually still like Darrell Henderson the most of any player in that Rams backfield when you consider cost. And it's actually been really nice that his ADP has fallen a good bit over the last month or so. So I would take Darrell Henderson at his ADP. But Malcolm Brown is a decent stash and a good best ball target as well. This next question is from @FantasyBulldog. Who do you like better out of Allison and Marquez Valdez-Scantling given their negligible preseason usage? Will Allison play from the slot? This is kind of a lame answer, but I think MVS is the ceiling play while Allison is the floor play. Like, Geronimo Allison has a better projection than Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He'll probably see more volume given he's likely to play more snaps from the slot. But MVS is a second-year player, and he has the size profile to be a great wideout in the league. That's why I've generally leaned MVS in drafts this year. Because when you're in the middle and late rounds, you should be looking for upside. And don't forget, MVS also played almost half of his snaps from the slot last year. He's capable. He's capable of playing anywhere. I just think there's more potential with him versus the fourth-year Geronimo Allison. But both players are good draft picks. This next question is from @MattVenzel. Based on what we've learned over the past month or two, how would you rank the top 5 rookies for Dynasty? Yeah, so going into rookie drafts this year, one thing was very, very evident. Things were not very set in stone. I talked about that and I wrote about it. We really needed to be open-minded about things changing and things changing drastically. I'd say my top 5 right now would be N'Keal Harry, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, and then a big question mark. Like, you could go anywhere from Andy Isabella to JJ Arcega-Whiteside to Darrell Henderson to a lot of different players in that 5 spot. But it's certainly a more volatile year for rookies, and it's another reason where my rookie draft philosophy holds true, which is to go heavier running back during your rookie drafts. You obviously have to adjust that depending on your team needs, but they're far easier to project in the short term. This next one's from @Mr_Pacman. If you have the choice, what's your favorite draft position this year and why? I actually don't have a super strong preference here. I low-key kind of like the end of drafts because you can get 2 stud wide receivers or have your choice at a stud wideout with a really good running back. But then at the same time, the 3rd round will often still have a good running back for you to choose from. So it just feels like a pretty flexible place to be. Back in May and June, the top of drafts were easily the best. But with so much uncertainty with Melvin Gordon and even Antonio Brown to a degree, you sometimes get stuck with a big drop in tier if you're in the 1 or 2 spot. So I don't really have strong feelings here. But I will say I usually like the top of drafts because they've historically had the best win rates. This year, though, just does feel a little bit different because of the number of wideouts who have legitimate wide receiver 1 overall upside. This next question's an email from Sean. It says, "Hey JJ, love the show. Thanks. It has truly helped change the way that I look at fantasy ownership for the better. Now that we're in the heat of draft season, how do you deal with post-draft regrets?" Yeah, I mean, I think that we've all left a draft before and we just felt a little bit annoyed by how things went. It didn't go as we had hoped and planned. It happens to everyone. It happens to me who's looking at this stuff every single day. Any regrets that I typically have to do with the middle rounds of drafts, that I played it too safe. I didn't reach a round or 2 for a player that I really wanted. But I think the easiest way to deal with any post-draft regret is to remember that you're going to be wrong. What you think is right in August isn't always right in December. I love Justice Hill this year and don't want to leave a draft without him. But that doesn't mean that Justice Hill has a 100% chance of far exceeding his draft day value. So just remember, the pick that you thought was the right one to make could easily be the wrong one. And then the pick that you made instead may end up being a league winner. Just remember, we're playing probability here. This next question is from @DSCon. You say running back catches are more valuable than rushes, and I agree, obviously. However, I would love to know the value difference between running back catches, rushes, wide receiver catches, and rushes. So I assumed that this was a fantasy football related question, so I went with fantasy points instead of like expected points or something like that. And I also figured that looking at targets instead of catches would be more valuable for listeners, so that's what I did. All I did to do this was tally every running back carry and attempt since 2011, and then compare that to how many yards and touchdowns they had to find the number of fantasy points per target and fantasy points per attempt. So I actually don't have fumbles in this data, so it'll be slightly different. There are also some players who have different designations depending on your data source, so this is all a rough estimate. At running back since 2011, an attempt has yielded about 0.59 fantasy points. A target in PPR formats has brought 1.5 fantasy points. In non-PPR, it's 0.75. So a target for a running back is still more valuable than an attempt in a standard league. At wide receiver, a target has produced 1.65 points in a PPR league. In non-PPR, it's 1.06. And then a wide receiver rush has averaged 0.81 fantasy points per rush. So targets are far more valuable even in a standard league. And these numbers can change depending on data set, but they likely won't change that much. This next question is from @PoppyStuda. Why doesn't Duke get an opportunity to be a lead back? He doesn't have to be a 30 carry workhorse, but the dude can handle 18 touches. He's the all-time leading rusher at a college that produced Edge, Portis, McGahee, and Gore. Had 242 carries his senior year. Dude is good. Yeah, I'm with you. Dude is good. I think Duke Johnson is a really solid 5th-round pick right now. Realistically, the chance that they find a running back who's better than Duke by not trading is pretty slim. So you're banking on a trade in order for Duke Johnson to really take a hit fantasy-wise. Maybe that happens, but I'll take my chances. But like if Carlos Hyde gets cut and then the Texans sign Hyde, is that going to be what turns you off of Duke Johnson? A dude who'd be on his 3rd team in 1 year? My biggest fear with Duke is that Houston won't be pass-heavy enough to really enable his upside. Because his upside is as a receiver. It's through the air. They were 27th in pass attempts last year, and they've been 20th or lower in pass-to-rush attempt ratio in each of the last 5 seasons. But I do like Duke, and if you're drafting this weekend, I'd be taking him in the 5th round. He's a lower-end RB2. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you guys for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and leave a rating and review. And if you're on Twitter, you can feel free to follow me @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend, and next week, the real stuff starts.